What's up, everybody? Welcome to Scale Your Real Estate Podcast. Just got out of an episode with Daniel Wang, who manages 130 doors in Arizona, 130 co-living rooms. This guy knows the ins and the outs of co-living, real estate investing, and management, bar none. Like better than almost anybody I've met. This guy is awesome. He really knows his stuff. So if you're thinking about investing in real estate and doing co-living, if you're thinking about managing co-living units, or you want to invest, or you want to find out more about it, this is going to give you a realistic picture. Daniel is a realist. He's not going to paint everything is not rosy colored, glasses with Daniel. No, he's going to give you the realistic picture of what this game is and what the future looks like. Enjoy this episode. It was fun for me. I hope you enjoy it as well. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Scale Your Real Estate Podcast. I've got an awesome guest with us here today. I'm smiling because I'm just so excited, actually, that we have him on. It took us a couple months to actually get you booked, didn't it, Daniel? But we have Daniel Wang on. He is a co-living expert, and he's the manager of almost 130 rooms, 130 co-living rooms in the Arizona marketplace. And so, Daniel, man, thanks for being on. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So I wanted to start off with just telling how we met. My Bigger Pockets episode first came out, and I think I either saw you on Facebook, or I forget exactly who reached out to who first. I don't know if you pinged me, I think, and then I reached out. We started a conversation, but we were in some Facebook groups together, and I just remember thinking everything you post, because you would answer questions, other people would be like, "What about this?" or "What about tenants?" or "How do you deal with tenant disputes?" And everything you would answer was just super spot on. And I remember, I got to connect with this guy. I got to partner with this guy in some way. So this is the beginning, right? We're just doing a podcast together. But I'm so grateful that you're out there to add value and really bring, not just like awareness to co-living, but really more than that. You're actually in the weeds, man. You're like doing it, which is really where the grind happens. So tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing right now, and kind of what your management portfolio looks like. I think that'd be really valuable for them to kind of wrap their head around that.
Sure. So what we do is our company is Avenir Homes. We manage, like Sam said, about 120, about soon to be 130 units are rooms spread out across, let's say, about 28 single family homes in the East Valley. And we basically help investors with, basically everything, starting from finding the property. We model it out. Once we buy it, help them set it up, furnish it, take care of any repairs, and then fill it with tenants. And then we manage them with a team of people both here in the U.S. as well as in the Philippines. So this keeps our costs low, but also allows us to deliver good service on both ends, because we basically serve, owners and tenants. So we have two bosses, and so that's why we have to kind of keep things going in a way that benefits both sides, and that's what we do.
Man, it's so cool. I'm so glad there's companies like you out there, because there's the big ones, right? There's like Pad Split and Bungalow and Alcove and Live Home Room. But then there's like I'm doing that in the Charlotte markets. You're doing that in the Arizona market. So this is so cool, because I think people will listen to this and be like, oh, I want to invest in the area, and you can fully manage it. Like you'll help them buy all the way to filling it, right? Hands off for the investor, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I'm an agent too, and also an investor, so I understand what investors are looking for.
That's awesome. Tell us, how did you get into co-living? Like, how did you even first come across it?
Actually, probably back in 2015. So I used to work for a tech company. I was at LinkedIn previously, and then when I first moved to the Bay Area, everything was super expensive. So just out of necessity, I had to split a place with a friend, and then I ended up paying $500 a month to sleep on a terrible IKEA futon, which probably to this day has caused me back damage. But I think that's when I realized, okay, there's a need for this, right? And at that time, Hub House, which is a relatively new concept, just came out in that area. So I talked to them, and then learned more about co-living in that way. And it wasn't until I moved out to Phoenix in 2017, 2018 that, I saw that even though rent is a lot lower here than the Bay Area, you're not paying, $2,000 for a studio or more, that there's still a need for affordable housing pretty much everywhere. So that's kind of why, with my very first investment, decided to buy the room. Bigger Pockets talks all the time about house hacking. So in the very beginning, is to tell people I do house hacking as a service. So basically, that's what co-living really is, or at least for someone who operates them. That's what we do.
Yeah, I always describe the difference to people as like house hacking is like when you're in it and you're living in it, but then it becomes co-living when they're like working with a company like you, right? Where it's like now it's an investment. That's just my personal definition. How would you define the difference between house hacking and co-living?
I mean, they're pretty similar, and I'd probably use the same kind of differentiation as you mentioned, like whether or not you're living in there. Kind of makes a difference because it does change the dynamic, right? Because there's a different power dynamic too being in there. So honestly, I did feel like, in houses that I lived in that I could actively manage, they were generally better because there's an understanding that someone was taking care of things. But we eventually were able to move past that kind of model because for the first year, I moved about 7 times. Each time we had a new house, I would just move there and set it up. But that became kind of unsustainable as we started acquiring, 4 or 5 properties a month. So and we figured out how to make it work.
So you used like primary residence loans and you moved 7 times, but by like buying these houses, or right? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, well, actually, I think I only own 2 of those properties right now. And then I have partial ownership in a third. The majority of that 28 are actually just with other investors. So the other folks that understand the need for this housing, but also can see the benefit to them, because we show them the numbers, like how are they going to perform, what kind of returns can they expect, and especially in 2021, it was a no-brainer because interest rates were 3% or less. So it's a little harder now, and we're going to talk about it later. But that's something that was a reason why we grew really fast during that time.
Yeah, interest rates has kind of put a little squeeze on anybody who's a real estate investor, right? But if it's making co-living look worse, it's making a lot of other stuff look very worse.
That's true.
It's not proper English, but it's not helping them out. So how do you find homes, man? Like, what do you look for in a home? If I came to you, let's just pretend I'm an investor. I'm like, well, I am an investor. Let's not pretend. I'm coming to you. I'm like, Daniel, I want to invest in Arizona. I want you guys to manage it. I heard you guys are awesome. You're crushing it. What do you look for in a home for me?
I'd say generally speaking, we look for properties that have ideally 4 to 5 bedrooms, at least 3 bathrooms. So the reason why we want more is simply because like houses aren't sold based on the pricing isn't based on the number of rooms. So then they're based on the comparables in the area. So you get a better deal when you have more rooms because for co-living, it does make a huge difference. The more rooms you have, the more revenue you can generate. We also look for potential in the floor plan to add additional rooms, and this is a little more similar to what Pad Split and Homeroom do as well. Just because, if you have an extra dining room that you don't really need to use, that you can convert by building a wall, adding a door, connecting electrical and AC, like it's going to only cost you a couple grand and it'll pay for itself within a year. So as an investment, it's a no-brainer. And I think that's kind of what we look for. As far as bathrooms, the general ratio we have found that's most effective is 3 people to 1 bathroom. So as long as we have enough bathrooms to serve the number of rooms that we have, those are the main 2 requirements. And then lastly, we avoid HOAs and pools. We do have houses that have both, which is sometimes difficult, but it's we find ways to make it work. So but yeah, if you're an investor, if you have the option, probably would avoid HOAs and pools because they don't add that much value, but come with a lot more operating costs, as well as administrative burdens with HOAs at least.
Have you had any hard run-ins with the HOA? Is it more just like violations and, hey, don't do this, or what are you doing? Like, have you had any like, hey, we're scheduling you a hearing with the board? Have you ever?
It hasn't gotten that far, but I would say good. I have enough HOA violations to probably start a small fire for a little bit, so they'll one day come in use when I need them to keep me warm.
Well said. When
yeah, but we haven't gotten that far. We always resolve the issues within their 14 days that they ask for, so everything's good. That's but great. They're just first the grass is too short, then the grass is too long, which is honestly, I've had 5 notices related to a lawn at one house right now. These people have nothing better to do, so if you can, you should avoid it.
Yeah, I agree. I got on a call with the head legal counsel for Pad Split, and their head lawyer was basically saying just that. Because I was asking him, like, how do you get around zoning violations? How do you get around all these violations? And he goes, look, 95% of your issues are trash cans left too long on the street, your house looking dilapidated, the lawn not being cut. He goes, if you make sure that your house looks just as nice, if not nicer than every home in that neighborhood, he's like, that will be 95% of your violations right there. And he wasn't specifically talking about HOAs. He was honestly more talking about the city. But he was just like, if you just do that and you keep the house really nicely, he's like, most of the time you won't get bothered by having people living in that house, you know? But he's like, it becomes an issue if those things are not there and then they find out there's a bunch of people living there or whatever. He's like, that's when it can become an issue. And of course, they've got a whole legal structure where they have memberships, not leases, to get around all of that. But more on that later. So how many, you mentioned 4 or 5 bedrooms, then you mentioned you mentioned 4 or 5 bedrooms, then you mentioned you convert a bedroom. So my question for you was going to be, what's the most amount of people you do have living in one house? And what's the most amount you've ever seen?
Oh, okay. This is a good question. So, I mean, for us personally, around 7 is the max we've done so far. I know I've spoken to people at Pad Split too, and they mentioned like, you can really push it up to like maybe 9 or even 10, but I haven't really seen the format in which that could work. And then also find that the tenant quality kind of declines when you're really just stuffing people in there. But it depends, right? Like there is also very much a need for it. Like we have a major construction project right now. TSMC is building a factory. They're investing like $21 billion into it. And we've been getting a lot of workers recently that have been applying that are, welders or electricians or tradespeople. So, and for them, honestly, they don't care. So maybe there might be a solution for them where they just need a place to live, make as much money as they can. They're journeymen before they move on to the next project. The most I've ever seen was actually in the Bay Area, something called the Rainbow House in Cupertino. I think had over 20 people, and that was when but they were built almost like a castle. So but I thought their concept was really cool because they brought in like they had speakers and everything. It was run by, I think, these NASA employees actually that were working up in San Jose. And then so I've seen 20 people in one. I thought it was pretty cool. They have this really long table, kind of Hogwarts style, where people have dinners every other Sunday or something like that. So then they can invite people, and they had a whole wait list too. So the way they ran it, I thought was pretty interesting. And it was like it's more similar to like an intentional living community because everyone in there is more or less engineers or entrepreneurs. They have like a specific focus. So it's not simply just a place to live, but rather a place to connect with other people, which I thought was interesting. Yeah.
That is so cool. That's community with co-living at a whole nother level, right? That's extremely intentional. When my Bigger Pockets episode first came out, I had a guy reach out to me from Hawaii, and he was looking for investors, and he had done something similar to what you just described. He took the top floor of a high rise in Maui, I think it was, and converted it into like 20 rooms. And it was just that waiting list, small rooms, big common spaces. People would travel from all over the world to stay in this place and meet. And it was just like all based on community. And so you can, if, for anybody listening to this, if that's a focus of yours, I think, Daniel, you and I we're in this from and correct me if I'm wrong, we're in this more for the investment side, but we also see how much it can help tenants from an affordable housing standpoint. But if anybody's listening to this and you're like, I just get off on the community aspect of this, like you can go hardcore into that. And this guy in Hawaii, he was charging, I want to say $2,000 a month for one of these. I mean, it wasn't exactly affordable. It was more exclusive to get in.
Yeah.
Probably same with the castle, I would think. That probably wasn't a cheap place to live.
No, it was not. I think it was like at that time it was already $1,500 for a room or $2,000.
Right.
On it. But there's entrepreneur houses. There's ones that are focused on certain types of people. Like hacker houses, I think was probably a lot earlier, which also emerged because of necessity in San Francisco. So that was a similar model. And I think
so. Educate a non-San Francisco boy on what a hacker house is. I honestly don't know.
Oh, it's just basically think of like a co-living place, except even more crowded. Like some of the rooms would have bunk beds or multiple bunk beds, and people would often go there. Like a lot of software engineers, entrepreneurs, people coming to the city. Think of it like an extended stay hostel, I guess is really the best way to describe it, but focus on people within the tech industry, at least at that time. I think now it's probably a lot more open because a lot more people need it. But at the time, it was just because so many engineers were moving that it just kind of emerged naturally as a way to solve their...
And they would work from there, they would live there, everything?
No, I mean, we didn't have work from home back then, so people would still, go to work or at least go to the coffee shop. But yeah, because I mean, it's kind of difficult to work inside a place with so many people. But they exist out of necessity, and I thought that was an interesting model too.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's super cool. I've never actually heard of that, but that sounds like the precursor. That's like that's like the precursor to co-living. That's like the founding fathers right there.
Basically, I mean, co-living in different forms has been around for a long time, right? We've had
That's
boarding
awesome.
houses going way back.
Right.
So I think that
Right.
that's a similar kind of model, except just without as much of a stigma from before, right? Like where people thought, oh, this is where you go if you don't have money. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you're seeking community, sometimes you're new. I think there's a benefit for people that, come to a new place and land in one of these co-living homes because they can meet other people, get to know the area a lot better without having to work really hard to find friends, which is a big problem. Like nowadays, it's hard for people to connect, and so being in person,
Right.
it's easier.
Right. Wow. So what do you think the future of co-living looks like? If you kind of just put your hat on, your predictive hat on for the next 5 or 10 years, where do you think industry is going?
So I'm a big like market research and data guy in terms of reports. So what I've seen so far is that it's going to continue to grow just because there's a big need for it, right? And on top of that, from a demographic perspective, a lot of Gen Zers, they like to share a lot more often. So I think that they're more receptive to this. We find that like older generations are a little bit harder to sell them on this. But for younger folks, this is what they look forward to. And I think economically too, it's unfortunately something that they're going to on average need, right? Because there's people who are graduating with more debt, they're making lower incomes, they have less wealth. So I think that those are the things that kind of contribute to the reason why co-living is as popular, is because it is solving a real need. It's not like, for some investors, they've done very well, even if they don't care about the social angle or the benefits, just because there's so many people who need this kind of housing. So I think it's going to continue to grow. And I think that as it matures, right, like there's going to be a lot more people, hopefully, that are doing this too, so that they can continue to make it easier for the next generation and other just folks in general who need housing that they can afford, to give them more options, because rent's not getting cheaper anytime soon.
That's right. Yeah, man. And I think it's cool. I want the audience to know too, like you mentioned those first couple of homes, you lived in those first couple of homes when they were co-living, right? Like you house hacked. So like this, you're not just speaking as an investor, because sometimes I'll get this kickback, I'll put an ad out there and people will comment like, this is just the latest greedy scam from landlords to make more money. And I'm like, that's not us, right? Like we've lived in these homes. I know you've lived in it for years. I lived in co-living homes for 13 years and loved it. I was making great money, but like loved my roommates. And I would still be living in a co-living home if my wife hadn't met me. I had 6 roommates and was like, Sam, this ain't gonna work long term. Like, I was like, okay, let's get a house to ourselves. But like, I loved it. I loved how cheap it was. I loved how the great people that I got to meet. I love it. You got to pay it was basically one fee and then everything was included. And I want to say that because I know some people listening, I know some people out there, there's kind of this negative anti thing. It's a greedy scheme. And I really, really, really don't believe that. What would you say to someone who's like, this is just the latest greedy scheme? And by the way, I literally will have like 10, 15 comments, on each Facebook post that says stuff like this. I'm not just, yeah.
That's Facebook, so I try not to spend too much time on those kind of comments. But
words of wisdom right there. Okay, drop the mic.
I think that really it's the thing I would challenge them to do is think about, well, what's the alternative, right? Like, okay, if we simply just use this as a single family property and we house less people, what about the other 2 or 3 that we could have housed? Where are they going to go now? Right? Like, are they going to be in a car, in the couch, at the park? Like, I think a lot of these people are very idealistic, and me too, to an extent, right? Like, I do want things to be where everyone can have what they want, but that the reality is that the economy, the way it's changed, co-living just makes sense. Like, I think it's a better use of the property. And then, in real estate, you have this principle of like highest and best use. You want to think about, how do you, given the location, the property type, like what you can do to either, to produce the most value with it. And I think that utilizing single family homes, as single family homes, when you have a great need for, just this kind of housing, right? Either whether it's transitional or just like, affordable housing in general, is really hard to come by. And it's just because a lot of developers aren't building it. There's no reason for them to build it. It's easier and more profitable, frankly, to build luxury apartments, have sell those because, like, they still maintain pretty high occupancy. They bring in a good profit for everybody involved in the project. Affordable housing takes a back seat, and so there's just not enough units for the people, right? And then incomes have barely increased in the last 10 years, and savings as well, right? Like 40% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, over 40%. The vast majority don't have more than $1,000 in savings too. So I think that for those simple reasons, like, there are, it makes sense what we're doing. We're not doing it to exploit anyone. Like, could it be done better? Probably, but it's not. I wouldn't put a lot of weight on anyone who's making those kind of statements, just because I don't think they've spent the time to understand the problem.
Yeah, dude, well said. Well said. That was not what I commented back, but I like your answer better. I love it. Oh man, I love it. What are two things? I kind of want to ask you a either or question here. What are two things you love the most about co-living from a investor's side of things? Like, just two things. And then what are the two most difficult parts about co-living from an investor's side of things? So just two things you love the most of, speaking to the investors who's going to be mostly who's listening to this call. What would you say?
Yeah, the two things that I like as an investor would definitely be the fact that you generally are earning higher returns than traditional rentals. Historically, about anywhere from 15 to 30% more, at least, and that's net of whatever you might be getting. And aside from making more, there's also the stability, right? Because you could take your property, and this is something we've considered too, is like, what if we turn them into Airbnbs and short-term rentals, right? There's no shortage of gurus out there who can tell you how to do it. And it's honestly not hard. And it can make more money. But the thing is, there's a lot more variation in terms of your returns, just because there's a lot of upfront costs. There's a lot of macroeconomic things to consider too, right? There's less people working from home, less people are traveling, there's less spend, and there's a lot more competition. So I think that co-living is kind of in the middle, where it's not a traditional way of operating. There is a little bit more work involved because you're managing, multiple leases as opposed to one. But on the flip side, you're making more money for that, and without the unpredictability of like short-term rentals or other forms of operating that property. And I know you said two, but the third one is a social benefit, right? Like, you can feel good doing it. Right? Short-term rentals, you can make good money, but it's just kind of like it's sometime at the cost of removing housing stock from a community that might need it. So, I mean, I guess they just wipe their tears with Benjamins, right? So I'm not sure. But I think, but that's kind of like, for me, like, I think there's that. It's the stability of it, the fact you can make more money. It just makes sense. Negative parts, kind of the operational side of things, right? If you're dealing with multiple people, can be different personalities. So, and I've seen like how some people struggle with that, is that, if you don't set things up right in the beginning, if your screening process is kind of not that effective, or if you're letting in the wrong kind of people, just takes one person to really make your life difficult. So operationally, that is kind of, that is a challenge. One that, over time we've learned how to overcome, because we've seen a lot of good tenants, a lot of bad tenants, and we know the difference now. But I think that for anyone who's starting, that's always a challenge, and it's always something that creates a lot of anxiety and fear. So that can be a problem. But I think that, with good rules in place and like a good, screening process, you can avoid a lot of problems. The other thing I don't like about it, I'm not sure. I mean, honestly, most of the problems I can think of are all operational. Like, from a financial perspective, nothing really changes. I mean, there might be a little bit more work for taxes, but that may not have to be the case. If you use, if you're not collecting everything through Venmo and Zelle, and you have like a software to do this, then you just get 1099 at the end of the year. That's not a big deal. But in the very beginning, the way I had things set up, it did create a lot of complications for taxes, where I had to go sort out all these transactions. So, but that all comes back to the setup thing. As long as you're set up properly, it shouldn't be difficult. It's just that for me personally, I made it difficult by not thinking about these things.
Yeah.
At least when I first started.
How do you deal with, tenant disputes? You mentioned different personalities. So I'm curious, how does your company handle that?
So we have everyone from the very beginning. We have them all sign house rules, and the rules are pretty clear about how we handle things in terms of like, what are they expected to do. The majority of issues, I'd say, come just from violations of those rules. So two main ones would be cleaning and noise. So I think that how we deal with it is, first of all, we try to understand, okay, the whole situation. We try to gather both sides and see, okay, someone's complaining about someone creating noise, and then we talk to the person's like, our quiet hours are from 10 to 8. Can you please, during those hours, don't create any noise? And usually that resolves the issue. Just people need a reminder that the house rules are there. If it becomes like a more serious thing, it's like, well, it's not about the noise, I just don't like this person. Then we try to understand why. And if that doesn't yield any kind of insight, then at least because we have so many rooms, we can just move them too. We offer them another location that maybe is more suitable to them, where they're less likely to have this kind of conflict, and move them. But it's rare, because usually we can solve the issue, right? If it's a cleaning thing, we tell everyone, please start cleaning. If nobody wants to participate in that, we try to encourage the house to come up with their own chore lists and schedule. But if they aren't able to do that, we will schedule cleaners for them as well, usually at their expense though. So then they're very much encouraged to start thinking about, okay, if they want to save that money, what they should start doing. But if they don't care, it ends up being beneficial to both of us, because then we know the house is being cleaned, no one is arguing about it, and they just pay someone to take care of it. So that's kind of how we generally approach problems. Just try to understand the source of the issue, see if we can resolve it. Most times it's a rule related problem. And also, as our process goes, like we send out 10-day notices to people when they do breach the lease in some way. So if it's the second time, it's not a warning. We give them, it's an official warning. And then if they do it again, at least deliberately, then we might go as far as moving forward with an eviction, depending on just how bad the situation is, if someone is truly the problem. But it's rare, because of our screening processes, the rules, the enforcement. We try to encourage communication, which tends to resolve a lot of problems.
Do you ever have to take that eviction process all the way, or normally do people just leave on their own if you've told them, hey, we're going to evict you?
It varies. And yes, we have had to evict people before. So we've let someone stay actually a little bit too long. He didn't pay rent for 4 months. So we've changed our policy now where, before we do try to give people more time, one thing we do is we try to figure out what's wrong. Usually it's because they lost a job, right? And we try to figure out, okay, how can we help you? And actually we do something where we review their resume and then try to give them advice for help on finding jobs. Because, if they're successful, then we are too. But if that doesn't work out, then, we don't see a path forward. Then really we tell them, all right, here are your options, right? Like if you don't move by this time, we have to file an eviction. And depending on how that goes, we might have to go all the way. So at least in Arizona, the process is really fast. I think within, it was 2 weeks of filing, you usually will have an eviction judgment on hand. And if they still do not leave at that point, which is pretty much never happened, then you can take it a step further with the court. But
have the sheriff come out and take their stuff out.
We were required to avoid that situation by just, staying in touch with tenants, understanding what's going on. If we notice they started getting late, we reach out first and see what can we do to help them. And then when rental assistance is available, we actually utilize that a lot in terms of helping them get their rent paid. So rental assistance, I think, paid us over $20,000. So shout out to Maricopa County for making that happen, and I guess the CARES Act for funding it. But I think that funding's dried up now, though. So now it's just kind of, we have to make tougher decisions where there's not always a win-win, at least when it comes to paying your rent on time. So,
right.
It's something we've had to do before.
I know for us that we found too that, just the nature of living in a co-living home is like you have other tenants. And so if people know, like if we put a 10-day notice on your door, we find that people just end up leaving versus like squatting. Whereas if it's their own home, if it's their own home and it's a single family home, it's a little bit more tendency to squat because it's like all their stuff is there. It's their home. It's a little, but we still have access to the common areas, so we can come into the common areas as long as we give a notice, right? So it doesn't fully feel like it's 100% their home. I guess I'm just trying to say, like, there's a culture of, we've just found it lends to people just leaving versus like, I'm going to squat here for 6 months and not pay you and drag this process out. But it also sounds like Arizona is very landlord friendly, which is very helpful.
It definitely is. I mean, I think in even the most difficult situation, I think the maximum time it takes is 17 days. So we've
Oh
actually
wow.
counted. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's from beginning to like when we first realized, okay, we're not going to be able to reach an agreement to when they are physically out, 17 days. That's all
Right.
it takes.
Wow.
So we have that at least as a potential, like, if we really have to, push goes, what's the term? I guess push comes to shove, right? That's what we would do. But I think that, we try to avoid it as much as possible because going through the court system costs money, and it doesn't really make sense to do it because a lot of times, people don't have money. So that's the whole reason why they're not paying rent. And all we get is a piece of paper saying they owe us more money. So we try to avoid that, and hurting them. We actually also, even after evictions, we help them with moving their stuff out. We provide them free storage for a little bit, just about a month. And then we, do what we can to help them get relocated.
Yeah. So, what would be your advice to someone who is taking in all that you're saying and thinking, "Wow, I don't know if I want to do." There's some people on here that might be listening that might be saying, like, "Oh yeah, I could do that. I could run a few of these." And there might be some people on here that are saying, like, "Nah, I don't want to deal. I don't want to have to deal with all of that." So, what's your advice to someone who wants to do co-living for the social benefits, for the additional cash flow? They want to invest in co-living as an investor. Should they do it on their own? Should they get a property management company? What's your advice to them to start?
It really depends on their goals, right, and their scale. So most people, when they start, they only have one property. So if that's the case, just house hack it. That'd be the best way to actually live it, go through the problems, I mean, that's why I enjoyed actually, despite having to move so many times, like I enjoy the process of meeting people, of setting up the house and learning more about, how to make their lives easier, as well as learning about the house itself in terms of what kind of maintenance or issues that it had to deal with. So I think that if someone's just starting, definitely just start with one. And then from there, you can kind of move on. It's a lot easier to manage too when you're the landlord and you're living there because you're less likely to have issues of people not paying rent. You see them every day. You can just ask them. And so, or put up signs in the fridge or bathroom or their room. It doesn't matter. Like there's many ways to reach them if you're in the house. If you want to scale it, then I would say it's kind of tough. Like I know these brothers here in Chandler, Arizona, they have, I think, over 5 properties that they self-manage, and they do pretty well with those 5 on their own because it's about 25 to 30 tenants. But I think that the challenge will be once you go, I'd say around like 50 tenants, then you really need to start focusing on systems and people. Like you may need to hire somebody, whether that's a manager or just building your own kind of systems. That's what ended up happening for us, and how our company was developed was more out of necessity because I tried finding property managers and they're like, well, why would we want to deal with so many leases? And a lot of managers at the time, and probably still are, just kind of reluctant to take on more work than they need to, which I understand. But yeah, there probably are operators out there. I know that you do this for people in North Carolina. I do that here in Arizona too. So there's individuals in this community, especially that might be able to help. And I think that that's what I'm kind of counting on in the future.
Yeah, and I've got a student who bought a property in Hampton, Virginia, so kind of in the Chesapeake, East Coast Virginia area, and he's willing to start managing for other people. He got his first property up and going, crushed it, built a nice little marketing campaign. Him and his wife are running. So there are operators, there are managers out there that are willing to do this, is what I want the listeners to take away. You might have to get into some co-living groups. You might have to get into some real estate Facebook groups and say, hey, who here manages co-living communities? And then, of course, there's these bigger, kind of more tech companies. I think the problem that I keep hearing about the tech companies is just they don't run the operations as well as guys like you and I. Like you and I are ops guys. I know you said you're a data and a tech guy too, but like we know how to put systems together. We know how to build these operations. And the truth is these tech companies, that's not what they're built on. They are, they're tech companies largely, to a large extent, is at least my experience. And so I just want people to know that there's options. As every month that goes by, I think there's going to be more and more options as this industry grows, as the need for it expands. Would you agree with that, Daniel?
Yeah, I generally agree. I think that the issue with those tech companies too, I'm not going to name names, is that the issue is that your house just becomes another number, right? For us, for our scale, we can effectively manage this. We're pretty attentive to like every little detail of everything. So I think that that's our advantage being a smaller operator. But I mean, I am concerned, like, if we ever get to a much larger size, like, we could have the same problems. So I'm refraining from making fun of them for now. But I mean, I think that once you're able to solve those issues, yeah, I mean, the leasing part, the operations, there are ways to manage it remotely, and that is something I'm working on developing. We could talk about later too, because that's something I think is what's necessary. That's a missing piece right now. It's also the most intense and least profitable part of this. But I'm hoping that with the Philippines team that I have, we can develop a solution.
Are you looking to develop like a tech or a platform type solution?
Nah, I mean, the thing is, like, where I see a lot of tech companies in this space fail is, first of all, thinking that they're tech companies instead of real estate companies. So I think that techness is not always necessarily the best solution. And when it comes to operations, like, it's just more about having the right people in the right place. So about setting up the systems for that and the processes for handling issues. So that's kind of what I focus on now, is more systems development and figuring out a scalable solution to this problem.
Now I'm curious what you're developing. Like, I really want to know.
Yeah, I mean, awesome. It's nothing special. Right? There's no name for it. This is not really any tech. I'm not building an app. It's just more like, developing like something that I think I can recruit people to run, and then be able to offer that as a service across different geographies. And I think that Georgia property, the multifamily we're working on, is kind of going to be the first test for that, because we're obviously not in Georgia and nowhere close to it. But if we can manage that effectively, the 46 units, then I think we have something. Then I can tell you that system works, and I can use it. Then at that point, managing one or two properties in an area is not going to be hard at all.
That's cool. Will those 46 units that you took on management in Georgia and you're in Arizona, will those be co-living, or are those just going to be multifamily, like single family apartments?
Those are going to be multifamily. I mean, yeah, they're going to be treated as single family, because I think the unit mix is kind of limited. None of them have more than 2 units. So that's the primary unit. Yeah, I did, or yeah, sorry, 2 bedrooms. So that's why I was thinking, like, if we could manage it as co-living, that would be great, especially because it's an area that's growing and where there's definitely demand. But at least the owner of that building, because I'm not the owner, isn't inclined necessarily to try that right now.
Right. And sometimes if it's only 2 bedrooms or even 3 bedrooms, sometimes the numbers just don't,
Yeah, it's
for the additional work, the numbers don't make sense.
Right.
Short-term rentals or co-living?
Depends who you ask. And for what?
I'm asking you.
We do both, actually. So we have 2 of our properties. We do manage as short-term rentals. So because I work with investors generally on finding, again, highest and best use, right? So sometimes we'd have this one property in Flagstaff. It's like a $1.6 million luxury property for sure, with 4,000 square feet and on 6 acres of land with beautiful views of the mountains. So like that one makes a lot more sense to run as an Airbnb. So in certain situations, yeah. And if we tried co-living, we'd be making literally a third of what we're currently producing with that one. Or it might even be impossible because of where it's located. It's kind of a rural area. So, using it for workforce housing doesn't make as much sense. So that's why I say it depends, right? Like, I think there's benefits, there's pros and cons to either strategy. Obviously, I'm very biased to co-living, because out of the properties that we have, there's only 2 short-term rentals. The rest are all co-living, because this is what I honestly care about. So it's more of a personal decision, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that concept. I talk about that a little bit too, but you've explained it in a really beautiful way of like, look, here's a $1.6 million house, these beautiful views on a lake or whatever, highest and best use for that home is Airbnb. Like, there's just some homes that fits. And I get that. I'll have students from my course sometimes send me these deals, and I'll look at them and be like, where'd you guys find this? It's on a lake and it's 3 stories and it looks beautiful. Like, this is an Airbnb property. You and I can probably just see that. Not everybody can see that. And when it comes to co-living, you don't need crazy nice. In my opinion, I'm curious your thoughts on this, but like, you need, like, I call it nice enough, right? So, level 2 finishes or B level finishes, whatever the technical term is there, of like, it can be just nice enough. This is people who, they do want to save money on rent. They're there for the community. They're there for the cheapness of the rent, and they're there for, the proximity to employers. They can get to their place of work in a reasonable amount of time. So, have you found that too, that there's a nice enough with co-living? Like, how do you coach investors on, like, okay, here's granite countertops and hardwood floors versus like laminate countertops and laminate floors or carpet, or like how do you coach them through what's nice enough when they're buying?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I agree. I mean, most of these folks, they don't really care. I mean, I was thinking about like, there was a time where I was really concerned about the popcorn ceiling in a property, and because it just looks really dated and gathers dust and is kind of gross. But I talked to several tenants that were living there, and they're like, "Well, until you brought it up, I never even noticed, and I didn't really think it was a big deal, anyways." So some investors, including myself, might overthink it because we just have different standards for the property. The most important thing, I guess the most important thing is just making sure everything works. I mean, I guess sounds like a pretty low standard, but just making sure that everything works is one. And then as far as flooring types go, I personally prefer LVP, luxury vinyl plank, or tile, because those two tend to last very well. They're easy to clean. I don't really like wood as much. Definitely don't like laminate because it gets damaged too easily, either from water or scratches. And then carpet is something that we do not like because carpets make turnovers difficult. They also get stained very easily. And that's the number one way you can make people feel like it's in a, terribly kept place, where make them feel like it's not a great place, is if they see a bunch of dirty carpet. If you have, relatively clean floors, the walls are clean, whether or not you have popcorn ceiling, all that stuff doesn't really matter, all that stuff does matter, I guess, to an extent. But yeah, I would avoid carpet, and I just try to find, surfaces that are easier to clean, to maintain, with the expectation that, whatever can be destroyed will be destroyed. Kind of, I mean, not always the case. I always have, for the most part, we have good tenants, but I try not to get too attached. And I think that's another rule of thumb, because like when we're buying furnishings, for example, with the investors, letting them know, hey, don't pick anything, you're not buying this for yourself. Just think about like, what is anything you would buy that, is going to meet their needs, but not, cause you heartbreak if it ever gets damaged. Because it's just, with enough time, everything will get worn out.
Wow. Man, this has been pure gold. This is awesome. This is so great. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Couple final questions I'd like to ask you. This one will be kind of fun. And I'm putting you on the spot with this one, but can you tell us, are there any tenant horror stories that you can share with us? But also any tenant like great stories that you can share with us. Like one I share, and I'll just share this one while I give you a chance to think, is like we had this little house get together party. And then this girl came over, and she ended up, one of my roommates ended up falling in love, and they got married. And I ended up, actually officiating their wedding. I'm not a reverend or a pastor or anything, but I did the online, 2-minute form and was able to marry them, And that was a really cool, like, hey, this came out of the community that we offered of co-living, right? The only problem with it was once he got married, he moved out. I was like, this is not good for business. I don't think, but it just, it's kind of funny, just a funny thing. But curious if you have any like from the tenant perspective, any like horror stories, just that would be and then any like really great success stories or amazing stories as well.
Yeah, I mean, success stories wise, we've helped people buy homes. I think several of our people have graduated in a sense, by being able to save enough money to go buy a property. So those are definitely success stories. We've help, I think, someone before who lost their job and couldn't pay rent. We looked at it and it's like, okay, how can we help you? What did you do? Ended up within 2 weeks, we got him, to improve his resume, give him a routine to follow too, because that was something he was missing. And I kind of just forced him to do this because I needed him to pay the rent. So and I told him, because he was like, well, I have no money.
Mutually beneficial.
Yeah, that's why I'm invested in their success too. And it's like, I tell them it's not entirely selfless, right? Like, I'm not doing this just because I'm a nice guy necessarily, because I also need you guys to make enough money to pay the rent. So we ended up helping him get a job that was twice as much as what he was making before, after only, I think, 3 weeks of searching, because I was having him every day, like, send out a certain amount of applications, and he got it. So to his credit, I mean, he did a lot of the work too, or most of it. I just simply told him what to do. And help him get into a more stable position too. And that's really what I try to look for, is those opportunities to really help people, not simply just to provide them a place to live, but to help them be successful, because in the long run, it benefits everybody and not just me. As far as horror stories go, I mean, there's a lot. So, I mean, I don't know. We have this one tenant that is leaving us soon, but she is kind of which is kind of difficult. And then on top of that, she has very severe mood swings. So I think one thing that causes people on my team as well as myself a lot of stress, and this all goes back to screening, is like we sometimes have people that have pretty severe issues that aren't as necessarily something you can detect early on, nor can you really ask them directly. But over time, it kind of reserved problems with like them just complaining every other day about things, and like just, I think at one point they were feeding cats in the neighborhood, and enough to where there was a giant pile of like cat poop, like a visible pile, which I didn't even know it could happen, but there was just that much. And then the zoning got involved, and they're like, the health inspector came and is like, you guys have multiple health violations. This is like, you're feeding the animals and all this stuff. So we eventually figured out it was her, because apparently they were her friends. So but yeah, and then also we later found out she's the one who called the health inspector. So I was like, so anyways, I was like, well, I asked her, do you really want to stay here or not? Because like, I don't know, you're trying to get our house shut down. So she's like, well, I really want to stay here. And then started, yeah. Anyways, there's an endless amount of stories like that of people that sometimes don't act necessarily in their best interests, their own best interests, and they just do things to cause chaos. So we've had people like that. We've had a house party thrown before by not actually one of our tenants, but a friend of a friend. This guy was crashing on the couch and then decided to make some money by hosting a block party, which was pretty crazy because I saw some of the videos later on, and they were, yeah, there was puke in the house plants. There was just like things missing, the knobs off the stove for some reason. So all four of them. Yeah. So craziness like that.
That's great. Yeah, man. Okay. Thanks for sharing. There you go. We're going to end right there on that great note of co-living. There you go, guys. No, I think the truth is, like, these things can happen with they can happen with an apartment. These are real estate stories more than they are, co-living specific stories. It's just, I love what you said earlier, Daniel. You got to do your screening, and then you have to have the system. So I know for me, one of the things that I really focus on right now is giving people those systems. If they don't want me to manage it, I have a course where I'll actually support them and like, here's the systems you need to have in place. Here's exactly the process we use to screen them, right? And all of that. And what it's so, and I know you guys, do something similar. I don't know if you're doing a course right now, but you're at least able to do it for people so they can be more hands off. And then you and I and our teams, get to deal with stuff like this so that our investors don't have to. So that's a really beautiful thing. But, well, man, this is pure gold when it comes to co-living. I think co-living, someone said yesterday that co-living right now, he thinks co-living right now is where Airbnb was, 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And I was like, oh, I like that analogy. I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, but I think where we're headed as a country and where our economy is going, where I at least believe it is, I think this is something that's only going to rocket fuel forward and is going to be needed in a big, big way. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. If people do want to get in touch with you or reach out to you or ask you questions or invest with you in Arizona or wherever, where do they need to connect with you at? Or how can they connect with you?
I guess just probably if you could share my email later, I guess that's something that would be helpful. It's just Daniel at Avenir, AVENIR-homes.com. So yeah, DanielAvenir-homes.com is my email. It's probably the best way to reach me, and then we can go from there. So yeah, I've connected with a lot of different people, both from your community and elsewhere, so that and I'm always happy to help. Like I don't have a course, and I'm not looking necessarily to make money. It's just more trying to help people who care about building up this community that understand the need for basically more forms of affordable housing. And this is just one of many different ways to solve that problem.
Man, I really feel that. And I just want to say this so our listeners know, I have a deep sense for who's there to add value or who's there to take. And every time I've seen you post, and I know I said this at the beginning, I'm just reiterating it, your heart is in the right place, man. You're out to help people. You're out to serve people. You're out to spread the word. And I want to just publicly say thank you for that, publicly express my gratitude to you. It's been very, very, very apparent. I know I've connected you with several people that just wanted to pick your brain, and you've been like, sure, I'll have a conversation with them. So thank you. Appreciate you. Grateful for you and grateful for this time together. This episode is going to reach a lot of people, and I think this is going to be, people are going to eat this up because it's just so detailed, and you can tell from listening, you know your stuff. This is not theory that Daniel's talking. Daniel's gone through this through and through, and those fun stories at the end are evidence of that fact.
Yeah,
You can't make those up. Those are ones you just get from doing what we do.
yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I mean, I guess I just want to encourage, I know I've said a lot of things that maybe can be kind of discouraging to some people, but I think that that there is a solution, whether it's something that, Sam and I have, or that you can develop later on to make things easier. And I think that there is definitely a need where for this kind of housing, right? So if you happen to be in a position to be able to buy a property and to do something with it, especially to rent it out to individuals, I think this is a good model to follow. And I think that this is going to be, like Sam's noted, something that's going to continually be needed, especially, with the way the economy is and how it looks like for the future generations. And that's what powers me. That's why I do what I do, is trying to figure out a solution, because there is we're short of millions of houses and units. So there's going to continually be a need for this, at least until the developers catch up, if they ever do, which is something, we don't know yet.
Great words to end on, man. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sam.